Hello and welcome to this edition of White Swan Foundation's Moving Minds webinar. This is Manoj Chandran. For those who are joining our Moving Minds platform for the first time, let me take a few seconds to introduce ourselves. White Swan Foundation is a non-profit organization which delivers knowledge services for mental health and well-being. We have developed India's largest knowledge repository on mental health, which is available in multiple languages and serves thousands every day so that they make more informed decisions on matters related to mental health and well-being. For more information, visit www.whiteswanfoundation.org. Our Moving Minds platform is an opportunity for people to interact directly with us or with mental health experts on a wide range of subjects. So welcome to this edition of Moving Minds. These are unprecedented times, certainly difficult times. Rarely has mankind been united in such a way and scale to deal with a singular cause as this. In times as these, we seek stories of resilience to learn from. We hold on to narratives of hope. And one such story that we look to is that of the Indian IT industry, which is one of the strong pillars of India's economic and also social structures. Not just in the economic space, the IT industry has also led many a social transformation the country has seen in the last 30 years. This edition of Moving Minds will attempt to capture ways the Indian IT industry and the millions employed there could set an example of resilience in the midst of an epidemic. We particularly try and understand the intersection of two seemingly diverse spaces: emotional resilience at an individual level and community resilience in the industry. It's a very interesting way to look at it. In today's edition of Moving Minds, I'm happy to have two esteemed guests with us, leaders in their respective fields. I welcome Dr. Prabha Chandra, a professor of psychiatry at NIMHANS. Dr. Prabha Chandra has led many mental health initiatives in the country. She was instrumental in setting up India's first perinatal mental health clinic. A good friend of White Swan Foundation, Dr. Prabha Chandra is also the president-elect of International Association of Women's Mental Health. My second guest today is Krishna Kumar Natarajan, KK to many of us, a veteran IT industry leader who led an IT services company from a startup to a billion-dollar organization. KK has made significant contributions to the shaping of the Indian IT industry as a community. He served the industry body NASSCOM as a chairman and today heads the NASSCOM Foundation. Welcome, Dr. Prabha and KK.
Thank you, Manoj. Wonderful to be on your platform.
Thank you. Before I start, I would request the viewers to leave your questions on the chat window. We really welcome your questions. Let's begin by setting the context by capturing the current situation in the IT industry. So KK, I would like to begin with you. Could you please set the context for us on how has the IT industry in India has coped with the lockdown over the last 1 month?
Like you mentioned, Manoj, it's certainly been a very challenging time. And the big difference between potentially the 2008 global financial crisis and today is that in 2008, the Indian IT industry was not at the core of delivering services to customers. But today you can proudly say that India is really the back end of global enterprises. So any dislocation of services in India would have really meant that transactions would not have happened across the globe. But what you see in the last 4 weeks is that all of us are doing our banking transactions online and those systems are working. Healthcare IT systems are working. Everything which is serving people who are challenged, which is technology driven, is functioning normally. Which I think is one of the big learnings even for me on the real resilience of the Indian IT industry. I have been speaking to a few customers of the Indian IT industry, people who live in the developed countries who probably are 8,000-10,000 miles away, or not even on the ground seeing what is happening. The uniform feedback from them is that they are pleasantly surprised at the manner in which their services have gone on without any hindrance, which speaks of volumes in terms of how the Indian IT industry has put customers as the core and done everything to ensure that customers and their systems aren't impacted. So overall, I think while it has been very challenging, I would think globally and to the world, the Indian IT industry has demonstrated why it really, in a way, earned the position of being a leader as the back-end services capital of the world.
Great. I think clearly, I think from an Indian artist perspective, it hasn't been working from home, but just keep working.
Yes.
And it was so as seamless as that. It didn't even matter to them. It was office or home. It was just continue to work, and it could happen so seamlessly. I think, yeah. Kudos to the industry's resilience part, certainly. Have you heard of?
Manoj, I would just like to add one more. I think
Sure.
while the industry did everything, here I would also like to sort of point out the role which the government and bureaucracy played in ensuring that a lot of things happen seamlessly. Because at the end of the day, for a person to work at home, you need very critical infrastructure like communications, and the way in which the licensing for communication can be done, the link cannot be extended outside. So the government and the bureaucracy, I really saw that they moved with agility. They moved with a sense of purpose. Because I think the government realizes that the IT industry, like you mentioned in your opening remark, is really contributing to the economy, to the global leadership. And with speed, they took decisions which made all of this happen. So it's important to also recognize the role of the government and the bureaucracy in making this whole transition happen very smoothly. Local administrations are extremely helpful, either in terms of movement of equipment or helping all of that happen easily.
KK, have you heard of any people-centric challenges as this whole transition happened in the last 1 month?
No, in fact, like I said, customers have been speaking to a few people who really are responsible for companies to deliver these services. While I think the whole notion of customer centricity has helped people do their job, I think the ability to sort of work with your team, learn from your team, and though the work gets done, trying to stay at home and not have the benefit and the value which you get from interacting with your team members, I certainly think in a way has impacted many people, because if it was for a couple of days, I think people would have just sort of taken it. But since this period is extended, it has led to anxieties of people saying, you know what, I'm missing the camaraderie with my team, I'm missing what I learned from them. So the sense of aloofness and in a way feeling that they're probably missing out on something is clearly what I think is going on amongst the team members. What I would also think is because it's something new, I don't think organizations have been prepared to help either project managers or their teams to prepare for this, because it all happened so suddenly. And for them, getting the work done was more important. So I think they prepared for that. But how do you take the wellness of a person when he's almost feeling aloof? And how do managers help him to transition that? And the managers themselves need help in their own mental state. That I think is an area which needs to have been.
Thank you for setting the context about the industry. Dr. Prabha, may I bring up the next question to you about, as a psychiatrist and one who is keen observant of the individual behavior and the social behavior in a collective way, what is your comment to the observation that KK made here about the industry?
I mean, I think he's spot on, really, because one, I think he really described the resilience of the industry. And one important reason why this resilience has probably happened is the sense of a purpose. And it has been seen that if organizations, people in organizations have a sense of purpose, they feel that they are helping out somebody, they're reaching out to somebody, a sort of sense of direct purpose, I think even in a crisis, that gives them a lot of meaning. And personally, I feel what I heard from KK is that that's what is driving a lot of people to be out there and deliver, and regardless of their own emotional states, the problems that they're facing, the uncertainty which is there, just getting up in the morning and doing that work which needs to be done. I think sometimes that sense of purpose is what keeps people on in times of crisis. So I think I completely agree with him that IT industry has probably really risen to this challenge, and one reason is because they feel they have a sense of purpose.
Dr. Prabha, that's a splendid point that I think, because I think through our conversation, this is one point which will repeatedly come up also in many ways. So we're going to stay with that point about sense of purpose. One of the oft described problems over the last 1 month has been about lack of clarity. Before we understand how has it really manifested in the IT industry, Dr. Prabha, as a psychiatrist, we would really like to understand what does this whole lack of clarity really do to us as an individual, and what does it do to our brain?
So uncertainty creates anxiety. We like to be in control. We like to know what's going to happen tomorrow, at least tomorrow, if not next week. What's happened now is that we don't know what's going to happen in the next few hours. There's so much of uncertainty. Protocols keep changing, messaging keeps changing. We don't know when the lockdown is going to end. We don't know when the grocery store will open. We don't know what's happening to our parents. We don't know what's going to happen to my job. Will I be laid off? Will my salary be cut? Today we heard that the DA for the government employees has been, we don't have anything for the next year. I mean, these are the uncertainties, and every time one news like this comes, the level of uncertainty increases. And I think human beings are wired to feel certain about a few things at least. So those of us who get a little anxious can get extremely anxious. So there are different kinds of people, and I think one can't sort of generalize how everybody deals with uncertainty. There are people who kind of take it in their stride, but there are people who might have been having other problems, might have elderly relatives at home who are not very well, might have just got a job, or might be just waiting to join the job, or might have been waiting to go to the US on a visa, work visa, or might have had a breakup. I mean, everybody's lives are different. And this has added to that level of uncertainty. Some people may have just moved abroad, wanting a new life, and within the first few weeks they reach there's a lockdown in every part of the world. So I think a lot of people from the IT industry are people, and life goes on. Just because the lockdown has happened or COVID has happened, life doesn't stop. Life goes on. So people are dealing with so many other things, and the brain really, when there's too much of anxiety and uncertainty, it goes back to its original sort of very basic level of functioning. So we have an organ in our brain called the amygdala, which basically is the brain which was very important when we were cave people. We had to go out and there would be a tiger and we had to face, and so you either freeze or you flee, or you fight. So those are the three things that the amygdala does. And usually we are able to manage the amygdala quite well, because different parts of the brain have evolved and they kind of tell them it's not a tiger, it's just like a little storm which is happening outside. But I think when you're deluged with a whole lot of frightening, anxiety-provoking stimuli, and you don't have recourse to solutions, that's when the amygdala really becomes very heightened, and fear sets in. And I think that's what's happening to some of us who may not have the wherewithal to manage things, or some of us who are dealing with multiple things at the same time. So like I said, life doesn't stop. And those people who are dealing with a few more challenges than normal can really feel out of control, and will try and do anything to get a sense of control. And that's what we try and help them through when people tell us that they're getting extremely anxious. And of course, media doesn't help, and watching media all the time doesn't help, because the anxious mind, the part of the brain which is the more problem solving, the mature brain, so to say, will say, look at the positives that are going on. But the amygdala, which is the frightened part of the brain, will focus on the negatives, will focus on the frightening things, pay attention to the exclusion of the positive things, and then, anxiety gets heightened. So I think that's what's happening with uncertainty for a lot of people.
And interestingly, thank you, Dr. Ban. Interestingly, in the IT industry workforce, both the scenario exists. So at an individual level where one has a sense of purpose and has been able to seamlessly move into a work from home environment, but yet this whole uncertainty and the angst and anxiety around it also exists. So the brain has to see both this whole positive and negative coexisting. So how do you see this emotional impact really playing in the mind of a person, and what could a person, an IT employee sitting and working from home, do to mitigate those negative forces in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. People, the IT industry was sort of used to working at home, and all of us who had to be out there would constantly envy them that, they have this whole choice of option of working from home. But even we as doctors have started working from home now, doing video consultations and all that. So new things have come up. But I think the working from home did not entail a lockdown, did not entail the fact that you couldn't go out, did not have, 3 family members also at home, children not going to school, or if you were a single person not being able to meet anybody. So I think it's a very artificial kind of a work from home environment. And I think that's what's causing a lot of stress. And I think this is the time for everybody who's working from home to find ways of becoming more resilient, which basically means that you have to develop some kind of qualities. And I'd like to highlight some of those qualities because I think these are very important. And one of the things, people would think that resilient people are born that way, but that's not true. Crisis makes people more resilient, organizations more resilient. Every time there's a crisis, you actually learn something from it. So resilience basically involves managing your emotions in a way which is socially acceptable, sort of not getting angry to the point where it's not acceptable. It's okay to be angry, but not to go to the point where it's not socially acceptable, not feeling terribly sad and, breaking into tears. I mean, just trying to manage your emotions better. It's also about looking at solutions rather than focusing on problems. So if you have a solution focused way of thinking about things. So yes, I have a problem. Yes, there's my child making noise and I'm supposed to do all this work. What am I going to do about it? Rather than getting overwhelmed by the problem. The third thing is, I think, managing conflicts through discussions is another, very strong character of people who are resilient. Being flexible is another very, very good quality. Like if you can't, do something here, do it in another place, do it some other way. I think not being rigid and being flexible is one more quality. And finally, I would like to say the other thing that resilient people do is they reach out for support. They're not scared to share their feelings. They're not scared to share, I'm feeling scared. So I want to talk to you. Or say that I am really not able to work, and reach out to the team manager and said, I can't cope with this today. I need some downtime. So I think resilient people have these qualities. And I think these are the qualities that all of us will need to develop over time, because we are all so used to being perfect and doing things in a certain set way. And this has kind of thrown everything hither and thither. And so to navigate our way through these unknown, uncharted territories is something, cognitive kind of flexibility is something which is very important, at the same time kind of managing our emotions. So I would say these are the qualities we would need to develop.
Dr. I think we have discussed a lot about the resilience, and we have seen that coming up in a lot of discussions these days. One of the questions I have seen people asking is this inherent? And you touched upon it, but it would be nice for us to get into a little detail, because people worry, do I have that? Can I cultivate it as a skill at any point in time? And what do I need to do to make sure that I can call myself resilient?
Yeah, so like I said, I think these are the sort of 5 key things that you need to, you need to be resilient, to be flexible, to be able to talk about to identify your emotions and to be able to share them with others, to manage your emotions in a way that they are socially acceptable, that they don't overwhelm you, to be able to manage conflicts, through discussions, and to kind of be more solution focused rather than problem focused. And finally, I would say to be more compassionate and kind towards yourself and others, to be more empathic. So I think each of these qualities is something that all of us can develop, and we do develop over time. So if people can sort of identify and monitor, because one of the things that we don't do is we are constantly on automatic pilot. We just keep doing stuff, we don't reflect. We don't think, okay, I said this to somebody, was it the right thing? Could I have said it some other way? I got really upset when somebody said they didn't like my work and I stormed out and I couldn't cope with it. Was there any other way to do it? So I think just being a bit more mindful of one's emotions, one's reactions. If I say my internet is not working, it's gone down, I have a deadline, and I become more problem focused rather than thinking, what is the alternative? Can I be more solution focused? I think it's a way of thinking, of feeling, of being constantly aware of one's own behavior, one's own emotions, what we call reflective thinking. And sometimes if you can't do it yourself, then it helps to do it with somebody else and asking them, I reacted like this, was there another way I could have done it? How would you do it? I also think resilience means going back to past events, that past crises that you have handled, because all organizations and all people, individuals have handled crisis in the past. It's not the first time. What worked for you then is something that you need to think back on and probably use those strategies because they worked for you in the past.
So the good news here clearly is that if you have found yourself lacking in any way on the resilient part, then you can develop it. You just have to work towards it, be positive that I can develop it. And here are the tips Dr. Prabha mentioned about how you could begin to do that over a period of time. And I think not just from the perspective of handling the current situation, but it is even more important for us to prepare ourselves to handle the future challenges that we may probably ourselves see into. So that's very important. I think, Dr. Prabha, one more very important point is that we've clearly seen an increase in emotional distress issues over the last 1 month across the population and profiles of people. There has been a certain spurt in the number of calls to helplines addressing emotional distresses. What are the possible reasons, and what do you have as guidance to people who may, perhaps more importantly, for the first time seen themselves in an emotional distress?
Yeah, so a lot of people have been calling helplines. Most of the calls are about anxiety related to COVID, anxiety to whether they will get the infection, interpersonal issues because of lockdown, uncertainty about exams, uncertainty about jobs. So I think a lot of the issues are very similar. In fact, the Lancet, which is the most well-known medical journal in the world, has actually carried a whole review of 25 studies which have been done in previous pandemics, in SARS and other pandemics, and they've laid out a whole range of psychiatric and psychological problems that are seen in pandemics because of lockdown, because of fear that I might get it, fear that my loved ones might get it. And the whole and the fact that in our country and in some other countries there's so much of other stuff going on, like stigma, which doesn't help. So every time there's cough or fever, the first thing that occurs to you, oh, I'm going to be in quarantine, somebody's going to look at me negatively, I will be isolated, I will be shunned. So that's a huge amount which is adding to this COVID issue. So I think these are some of the issues that are coming up. And in terms of solutions, I would feel that a lot of it is about identifying what your worry is, because sometimes you might be worried about 10 things, or you might be worried about one thing. I think I often tell people who come with anxiety and these worries is to, why don't you break down your worries? What are you worried about the most? Is it about the job? Is it about your dad being 90 years old and not being able to care for himself? Let's figure out what your worry is. And sometimes I think just identifying each and every worry and sort of dissecting it a little bit and saying, okay, let's deal with this one, and not fueling the worry, and like I always tell people, pouring more petrol into that worry and making it so big that then you can't handle it. So using an approach which I'm sure people use for any problem solving, that dividing your problems into really bits and then trying to solve each problem is one way, and trying not to keep everything within oneself and not wanting to appear this very strong person who has to deal with everything, but to be able to say, look, I'm feeling vulnerable today, and acknowledging that and accessing some support. And you'll be surprised that, you know, it's not just professionals who are supporting each other, the community is supporting each other. So I think just talking about it, it makes a lot of difference.
Thank you, Dr. Prabha. KK, I have a few questions to you with regard to the IT workforce. And I was just wondering, because there are a lot of people certainly who are working from home, but there is also the fact that not the entire bandwidth is being utilized perhaps while working from home. And there is also a set of people who may not be working from home. So how best do you think an IT industry employee can really, while they wait out the lockdown, best use this time that they have and probably additional bandwidth that they have found with themselves?
See, that's a very interesting question, Manoj. I think there are two things which I have learned during this last 4-5 weeks. Interestingly, while people talk about professionals who are working as a part of the IT industry, the truth is that there are about 3.3 million people working in the IT industry as professionals. There's almost double that number, 6 million people who are supporting them. People who are either doing the security work, or people who are electricians, or sort of office cleaning people, and so on. Now, so one of the things we identified in NASSCOM Foundation is that while yes, we are the Technology Industry Association, we must sort of help out these people who don't have access to help. Because I think it's not the job of the government alone to help out the underprivileged. There's only so much the government can handle. So private enterprise has to come in far more effectively. Yeah. So we also started a portal within the NASSCOM Foundation called My Kartavya, where IT professionals, like you said, in spare time, can volunteer to come and help. Sometimes they can sort of donate resources. Many times they can give their time to say, hey, we can come and do this. So what successfully is evolved out of that is, though as a technology association, there's nothing in the charter of NASSCOM Foundation to feed the underprivileged. In about 5 cities, in specific local things, we are feeding the migrant population. As of the statistics yesterday, I think every day we are feeding something like 113,000 people across these 5. But the good part is, I think we have engaged the industry in that. Like we're using the canteen of Wipro in a location, we're using the canteen of the kitchen of SAP in another location. So resources which are there with the corporates are being used. And here again, I must say the local administration has been very helpful. I know in one city, the police guys said, you know what, it's difficult. We know that you'll need to find a place to distribute, so use the police station to do it. Similarly, the departments of labor have been extremely thankful because they have pointed us to where the migrant population is. So it's been a lot of collaboration, but we also learned a lot in that. In fact, some of the problems solved came from the volunteers in the IT companies. Because earlier we thought we'll just take a city and distribute. Then we realized that with the lockdown, it's impossible to cover a city. So they came up with a plan of how do we identify where the migrant population is, and we have to do it local, which is how the whole idea of using a Wipro kitchen or an SAP kitchen came up and thing. So a lot of the IT professionals themselves, and rightly so, like doctor indicated, that when the individual or the organization has a sense of purpose, they start doing actions in a more meaningful way. So all that at the foundation level we did was to create a portal where they can come and indicate a purpose of saying, I want to help out those people. And a lot of these problems are solved by them, not by NASSCOM Foundation or somebody. I think people found local solutions, how to do it. And the whole learning of saying that, hey, you can't think of doing, because otherwise, to be honest, we were so, I would say, naive about it, thinking that we can do the distribution of Bangalore. Even in Bangalore, we couldn't do it. And after 3-4 weeks, it's come to a stage where a lot of the problems have been solved by volunteers who out of their own purpose have come and said, you know what, I think I can help solve this problem. So I think one key thing is sort of tying up with what Dr. Chandra said, is to really try and say, how do you bring in that inner purpose of people? Because they are bothered about the whole problem. They want to help others who really need that help. And as organizations, how do we create a platform to help them achieve that? On the work side, there's a very interesting example which one of the VP engineering whom I met said. He said over the last 2 weeks, he's found that beyond just work, there needs to be a way to engage people and their creativity. So he says in a week, twice, he has what is called a hackathon challenge, where he indicates 2 problems which customers have faced. And the rest of the team sort of finds solution to it and presents it to him the next day. So he says, I'm surprised at the number of unique solutions you have found, because it's a product company, they're building products for the global markets. He says, never have I had so much of participation from my team in really trying to even create the next generation way of working, which solves a client's problem. So how do you, through a problem-solving approach, engage people and find solutions and problems? I think is another way of engaging people.
So clearly, I mean, these are great initiatives, I think, and this is about creating platforms for people to be able to recalibrate their sense of purpose if they find that they're not able to do their routine jobs, So
Correct.
This is good. One of the reasons for anxiety among IT industry employees is an uncertain future. How would you allay their fears about the future that they carry in the IT industry?
See, one, Manoj, what I feel is, unlike the earlier crisis, where I think everybody saw what could be the potential outcomes later, be it the dot-com burst or the global financial crisis. Everyone saw that once the subprime crisis gets solved, maybe the industry will come back to a normal, and that could take 12 months. So the ability to communicate with confidence, saying that, hey, we think it's going to be a U-shaped recovery or a V-shaped recovery, things will come back to normal within 12 months. So let's just go through the pain, live through this pain, then we'll come out stronger. We're more positive communication. But I must be honest, today in this crisis, nobody has a clue in terms of how this is going to play out. And to that extent, people are cautious in terms of communications on a very positive future, because you don't know what things are going to be. I'm just going to recollect a small little instance which happened this morning. See, anxiety many times builds up when things happen when you think they're almost improbable events. So this guy was having this concern, saying that, hey, I know that the market is uncertain, so I had put together some savings. And normally, in a sense, sometimes we talk financial, so I told them saying, hey, amongst options is equity is risky, but debt funds are more sort of safer and so on. So he says, I put money in debt funds. Unfortunately, late last night, one of the best known names in the global world on debt funds suddenly said 4 of their funds, they're getting too much of things for redemption, and they're going to close that down, which means that he doesn't know whether he'll get that money. And this is something which he would have never anticipated. It's almost a white swan type of event which has happened. And that builds that sense of anxiety in terms of people. So to be honest, I think the one thing which I keep telling a lot of startup founders who are also extremely under stress situation is that I think it's best to be transparent, to say, you know what, nobody knows what the answer is in the future. But all we can say is tell you that these are the incremental positive things which we need to influence and make it happen. And as long as we keep doing that small little steps, hopefully we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. But right now, clearly, I think he also cannot sort of indicate saying that things are going to be fine in 6 months, 12 months, and so on. Yeah.
Dr. Bhatt, this is an interesting observation that KK makes, because many a time what happens is, as people in the community and mass, basically, we look up to somebody in the leadership, or some entity to say that, can I hold on to that as my ray of hope? Hope is an important part, and if you could really help us understand what is hope and why hope is such an important thing. How do I personally, at an individual level, build my own platform which could become a hope for myself if there is nothing existing in the external world for me?
Well, I think that, we need to sort of redefine how we are going to be hopeful from now on, because from what I can see, this is not going to be the last time that something like this is going to happen. I think that, we've had, like KK mentioned, we've had problems in the recent past and we bounced back. So I think that crises and pandemics and climate issues and other things are going to be the new norm to an extent. And both individuals and organizations will need to have something which we call bounded optimism. Basically, it means that you should be optimistic, but you should not be unrealistically optimistic. And what we found is that people who are more resilient, who build up hope also, are the ones who are better prepared. So one of the things that we say don't do is don't be in denial. Because I think many people around the world initially, including many of us, understandably, because this had never happened to India before, and so we were sort of in denial and a sort of very false hope, false optimism kind of a picture. Maybe we didn't prepare enough. So I would feel that it's important for every individual to kind of anticipate that if there is a crisis, how am I going to handle it? So make that plan. I think it's very important. And once you do those reparatory things or manage the whole thing, I think once the crisis is over, to learn that you were adaptive and that you will adapt to a new normal, to a changed position. Managing change is going to be something which we need to learn as a new mantra. And also about hope, I think basically realizing that in the past, there have been many situations where the world and as individuals us, but as a world, we have risen after tsunami, after floods, after Katrina, after the whatever crash, everything, we have again risen. So to just have some hope in human resilience, but I also think to kind of change goalposts a little in life. I think that's something that all of us are realizing, that if our goalpost was to make so much money and to be this person, that may no longer be our goalpost. Our goalposts may change, our ideals may change, our wishes and visions for ourselves and our lives may change. And I think that is what is going to create more hope. Because if there's something that which resonated with what KK mentioned, is something which the COVID has done, it's brought people together. It's brought communities together. It's brought public health out into open. It's told us that maybe you need to spend more on health than on defense, because that's where everything lies now. So the economy is dependent on health. So I think there have been so many new learnings. So to kind of say, what, this is bad, but then it has taught us so many other things about the way we need to lead our lives. So maybe that will create more hope rather than personal aspirations and goals,
I think you bring in a very important point about shifting goalposts for ourselves as an individual. And if we largely agree, I think IT industry workforce, which has largely been in the urban-centric space and geography of the country, has been found themselves very accessible in terms of resources. And suddenly, I think it is important for them to be able to understand that whole shift in goalposts and bringing in a change and shift in lifestyles is something they'll have to call by themselves and redefine what lifestyle should mean to me. And do you see that redefinition that they begin to do can really bring in a little bit of stress emotionally in their mind?
It could work both ways. I think if many people might see this as as a silver lining, that, you know, they don't have to worry so much about material aspirations and, you know, promotions and all of that, and then just living and being happy and continuing to do good work becomes more important aspirationally rather than acquiring things. But yes, it is going to create a dissonance. And I think before any change, there will be dissonance, there will be turbulence, there will be chaos. It's going to be there. And I think, but people need to understand that chaos that's going on within themselves, and learn that, yes, you know, this change is going to be inevitable. You have to think of a new normal. The way we look at our life will change after this. There was an article which I read which said that this is the biggest psychological experiment that the world has ever seen. You know, nothing like this has ever happened. You know, so obviously there are going to be huge changes in the way we look at ourselves and the people around us and the world around us. So yes, so it's a challenge, but I am optimistic that people will dig deep inside and find inner resources. And like KK mentioned, the solutions that people are coming up with are immense. So we've started a virtual cafe for our doctors, because earlier they would, you know, meet in the coffee shop. In Nimhans, we have a little Nagaraj cafe where it's like a rundown shack, but then there's, you know, seating beside, and that's where all the ventilation happened, all the discussion about problem cases happened. Now you just don't have that, you know, and that was where the camaraderie was there. And that was a stress buster. So we've started a virtual cafe every evening for our junior doctors. And it was so amazing that they came up with such wonderful solutions. And they were not just thinking about themselves. They were thinking about the nurses. They were thinking about the security staff. They were thinking about the attenders. They were thinking about patients and relatives. So for once, I think there is some space in the brain to not just think about oneself, but think of your community as well, and to think of other people around you. To me, I think that is a really hopeful situation.
That's a good point for us to move into the next part of our discussion, and which is about looking at IT industry as one single large community. And let's try and understand that how has this single entity called IT industry as a community really been able to prepare itself. So may I start with Dr. Prabha? So during adverse situations, Dr. Prabha, we have seen emotional distress spreading fast among communities. How do emotions such as fear travel in the community, and how do they become a collective emotional distress, or you know, the happy part of it sometimes?
So yeah, so you know, I was very much part of the HIV you know, epidemic initially. I was one of the few people who were sent by the government of India to Africa, to sort of remote villages in Uganda, the Rakai district, where I saw real devastation because of HIV, and then came back to India and started working in the field. And very similar things are happening today, because anything which is unknown, you know, COVID is unknown. Even doctors don't know enough about it. So where is the question of the public knowing enough about it, you know? So, and every day some new thing comes up. This drug works, this drug doesn't work. Vaccine is there, vaccine is on there. It's a mutant, it's a different. So I think there's the fact that something is unknown creates fear, you know? And then and no one is spared of it. At least in HIV, it was, you had to do something to acquire the infection. Here, without doing something, you can acquire the infection. So it's a great sense of vulnerability. And it's a great sense of vulnerability for myself and for my loved ones. And there is very less I can do. Okay, I can do social distancing, I can wear a mask. But again, you know, it's not foolproof. So one is the fact that that you don't know enough. The fact that people think that it is a fatal illness, while it might not be in all cases, but it is potentially fatal. So it is very scary that, you know, you can do only so much to not get it. And if you get it, then you don't know what is going to happen. So I think that is creating this whole sense of fear. And once fear starts, then there are very few people in the community who are doing reassurance, you know. The fear group is more than the reassurance group. In the UK, they've started these reassurance patrols by the London police, where the police is going and reassuring people about things. So I think that's what we need now. We need a few more reassurance patrols that fear doesn't spread, because the unknown, the vulnerability, the fact that it is dangerous and life-threatening, the fact that even without doing much you can acquire it, is what is, I think, creating that great sense of fear, which is, to all of us.
Dr. In a community, I mean, at an individual level, maybe it's easier for us to build a sense of purpose and communicate that, get that person to understand. But why is it so difficult for all of us to come together as a community and say that we have a single sense of purpose, particularly in this COVID situation? While we will, at our professional level, we'll have a common sense of purpose. But as a single purpose to defeat this or to be able to address this problem, and therefore maintain those norms that we have collectively identified for ourselves, why does it become for all of us collectively to follow those norms together?
Well, I'm not sure whether how much of it is like cultural, because, civic movements, civic society action has not been that prominent in India. Yes. Like maybe unlike maybe the US or the Scandinavian countries, or some other countries where communities get together, neighborhoods get together and do things for each other. If there is no electricity in the road, then it's not just one person, one uncle who does all the shouting, but there's the group which does it. So I think that whole sense of community is something that it's always been me, my house, my family. Most of us, maybe my office, maybe my organization, but not so much my community. I think that is something that is very important. And the challenge is on how to develop it. What is it that we can do? Because we know that it has to be a community movement. Yes. Kerala is a very good example of community movements, where the reason why they have been able to manage is that the leadership in the community is working so closely with each other. Similarly, Sweden, so closely with each other. Okay. So I think that it's something that we need to learn. It's new for us. We haven't done it in the past. We've risen when there have been disasters, but we always, like KK mentioned, we tend to look for the outsider to help us. To the superior to help us, for the boss to help us. I think there needs to be a sense of feeling that we can help ourselves, and instill that a little bit more. So social change is important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think in the IT industry particularly, because in many ways it has been a close-knit industry, there's much better communication, I would say, if I could, among the organizations and between the community members and all. How important is communication as a channel, as a media, to bring in a sense of purpose collectively in a community, Dr. Ba?
I think it's very important. I think it's communication and also avenues of being able to do something. I think because we are not used to working for the community very much, I think many of us don't know what to do. And I have always said that altruism is a quality which is there in all of us. Sometimes we don't know what to do. So creating a portal where volunteers can actually say, I volunteer, tell me what to do, is a wonderful way. So maybe just, using the police, using the local cooperators, using in villages, using Panchayati Raj, whatever method one can actually get people together and giving opportunities. I think everybody's looking for opportunities to help each other, and to be able to communicate that through newspapers, through other methods, that these are the opportunities. This is what you can do for your community. I think will bring out more people.
Okay, if I just come in for one question, picking up from the very important points that Dr. Ba mentioned, do you think NASSCOM Foundation particularly can really have a role in communicating to the country and other communities about how we could come together and build a common sense of purpose around COVID, around really addressing the challenges of the pandemic that we are dealing with?
No, you're absolutely right, Manoj. And like Dr. Prabhas said, about 2 years back, NASSCOM Foundation actually launched this portal called My Kartavya, where the purpose was really that, asking IT professionals to come in a way, put in their interest. It also had a similar thing from organizations or from communities saying, hey, where is it that they want help? So if somebody is interested in teaching English to the slum kids around his area, so that was registered as a project and people came, searched through that and then said, you know what, I want to spare 4 hours in a week for doing it. It's certainly been successful. In fact, it had almost 200,000 registrations, and last year, I think NASSCOM Foundation would have touched about 112,000 people just through pure volunteering efforts, and just being a platform for people to see what interests them and how they can contribute. So after COVID, there's been an additional thing on it saying that, hey, in meeting the challenges of this pandemic, how can you help? And people have responded in a wide variety of space. There have been some people who have said, you know what, I want to contribute money. Yeah. Or I know of a facility where we can make a simple mask and distribute it to the local people around. To the whole thing of distributing food for the migrant community in the locality in which they're in, and they really taking the role of being the people who will manage and execute that operation. So, because it has a lot of logistics associated with it. Yeah. So I think it's a great opportunity to, in a way, provide people the information where they can come and help, and in a way engage them, seek their help. Because rightly, like Dr. Pravas said, people should seek help when they need. Even as a community, many times we don't actively go and seek help. We just think if people are interested, they'll come. But that's not enough. I think you need to communicate saying that, you know what, we're planning to deliver this 1 lakh meals to migrant people, for which we need at least 200 people in these various locations. How many of you can really help out? So it's a very important thing. Even organizations like NASSCOM Foundation start taking this role of trying to see what is it that can make some of these initiatives far more effective. How do you create the right platforms to engage the industry? In fact, it's strange that since I'm talking about my Kartavya, it was initially open only for the technology companies. During COVID, we got a lot of requests from people completely outside the technology industry saying, hey, we heard of this, we are not a part of it, but can we contribute? Which was a real, in a way, it was a big learning, because we said that people are not getting bothered in terms of saying who's delivering that, or no, it is NASSCOM, it's an association for IT industry. Why should I go and volunteer there? Because by their own thing, they felt, hey, I think I can contribute, and it is for a good effort. We sort of opened it up for anybody who can come and contribute.
Prabha, in the early part of our discussion, we had some discussions around the individual's resilience. From a community perspective, also there's this whole concept of community resilience. Collectively, there's a need for us to make sure that the community is prepared and has resilience as a character in the community. How do you think Indian IT industry, which has again been a very good community, can develop community resilience to address some of the challenges that potentially lay ahead of us?
Yeah, so one is, of course, very strong leadership, which I think is extremely important, that the leaders should have a buy-in into this whole concept that they need to develop resilience. Because like I said, organizational resilience is something that we will have to develop over time. I also think so that's one thing. But like I mentioned earlier, I think preparedness will be very important, because one thing we learned from disasters. So when you have disaster zones like the tsunami area, or the earthquake zones, Uttarakhand, etc. After the disaster has happened, the post-disaster work after this rescue and everything is basically to ensure that when there is a next disaster, you're completely prepared, as much as possible. I mean, you can't be completely prepared, but you're very well prepared. And I think that is something that maybe the IT industry can start kind of focusing on, to not just in terms of the financial angle or the organizational part of it, but that every individual knows that there is a risk plan, that that they will be considered when something like this happens. What can they expect if there is a next crisis? So I think just having that preparedness is one of the key ways of managing crisis, because it doesn't catch you unawares then. And I think that's very reassuring for the employees, and it's good for the leaders because they have something to fall back on. So I think that's one thing that organizations should do about being more
Yes.
prepared for all these areas. And also, like we mentioned, making sure that every stakeholder in the whole scheme of things knows about what is going to happen, and has a say in some of these things. One of the things that we often do is have such a top-down kind of a approach, and when crisis happens, then it becomes even more top-down, because we look at it like a war kind of a situation, and we don't want. But I think listening to stakeholders is extremely important. Listening to your customers, listening to the lowest person in the rung may have some wonderful ideas, and just having everybody involved gives them a sense of bonding. It also gives them great strength, because they know that something is going on, and being transparent, like was mentioned. So I think these are things that organizations can actually do, so that when the next time something like this happens, resilience automatically kicks in. And also, I mean, I don't know whether you're going to bring this up later, but just to kind of add that providing mental health support, maybe at initially very low-key kind of support, self-help, then maybe the second level, access to somebody whom they can talk to over the phone, and then the next level, more intensive work. I think even if the organization, the people know, they have a plan for that, so that you don't go scurrying around looking for therapists or looking for the app which is available, but it's already there. You have tested it out, you have taken stakeholders' opinions about it, and you have things set in place. So I think even for mental health help, having things set in place is another very, very key way of ensuring that resilience happens.
Yes, Dr. Thank you for bringing this up, because I wanted to say that one of the few positive things that have happened perhaps here in the last 1-2 months of our fight with COVID is that mental health care and mental health workers have never found a more center stage as nation building component as we have seen in the last 2 months, actually. So this is such an important thing that the world and nation and ourselves as an individual have begun to understand the importance of healthcare workers here. I think also in a general way, health has largely been seen in a very transactional way. I mean, if you look at it, we have very transactional. We say that, okay, if I have a problem, I have to do these things. If I don't have a problem, I have to do this. But I think it is a great learning for us to say that health in general and mental health now, which increasingly is becoming an important component of health, must be seen beyond transactional things. And how do we do that? How do we make sure that it is ingrained into me as my character, behavior, personality, and many other things?
True. I mean, I think what you're saying is so right. Like they said that in New York, they've made these hospital as tents now. So they're saying that the second big tent is going to be one for psychological help, because that's going to be the one thing that everybody's struggling with, and people need it. And COVID may affect 10% of the world population, but mental health is probably going to affect everybody after this, each one of us in some way or the other. So I think that, developing some of these methods of learning how to cope with uncertainty, cope with situations that are difficult, is something that we all will need to build into our psyche, and very early on, including as you're growing with the kids, with adolescents, rather than waiting for something to happen and then trying to think of mental health. So I think organizations like White Swan Foundation will have a major role to play, because as psychiatrists, we are 11,000 psychiatrists for the whole country. It's hardly anything. So I think we from NIMHANS are trying to train as many people as possible to be there, barefoot soldiers, so to say, and try to work And there are many organizations, many not-for-profit, profit organizations coming up, which are expanding the scope of mental health to see that till the last mile we are available, easily accessible. You don't have to go to an institution, travel so far to get mental health help. It should be available if you want on your device. It should be available, over a phone. So I think it's changing the way we are looking at mental health and well-being and positive mental health. And one of the things that we are talking about a lot is positive mental health, about also focusing not just on the negative mental health, but also building one's positivity. And one of the ways that, everybody's been talking about is to learn the whole skill of gratitude. So while many of us keep thinking of what we don't have, is to think of what we have and what we are grateful for, because that is one big positivity that makes us view the whole world in a different way.
I would like to now move into the next component of our discussion, which is about the role of the leader here. KK, if I may start with you, what do you think is going on in the mind of an IT industry leader today, KK?
See, clearly the IT industry, again, I would put it in a different way. As the crisis just started, the focus was really on the customer, saying that, hey, the customer has put in so much at stake with us. How do we ensure that we don't disappoint them? So clearly was the customer. And to enable that was clearly trying to provide whatever support for the employees to deliver that service to the customer. Having seen through that cycle, today I think IT leaders are really bothered about in terms of the wellness of their employees, issues of saying, how do we engage them in a more constructive manner? How do we ensure that this does not lead to a scenario where they lose their motivation? How do we really keep the alignment of the team with the organization and help them grow? Because for everybody, it's a new normal. They're not used to in terms of what they're experiencing. So how do you really sort of try and meet those? I don't think as yet I see many leaders having a thought mindset and saying this is how it's going to play out. Everybody, as of today, is waiting and watching in terms of how that will play. But clearly, I think all of them are united in one purpose, saying irrespective of what the new normal is going to play out, how do we ensure that the employee base is protected, they are motivated, they continue to deliver high quality services to their customers. On that, I think there seems to be a complete alignment.
Yeah, KK, I mean, as we were talking about customers, there's a question that came up customers, this is a great opportunity where Indian IT industry has been able to demonstrate that even working from home really works. And we have been able to seamlessly do that and without any drop in efficiency and productivity. So will the IT sector customers' resistance to do remote work reduce going forward? And do you see that this can lead to increase in demand among in the IT services?
See, interestingly, I know they mentioned this. I was speaking to a few customers and they were pleasantly surprised at how well this transition has happened, which in a way has increased their confidence that this is a model which is there to stay. They could do it in a bigger scale. They now know that it can be done. And their level of risk with such a sort of offshore model with even people working out remotely clearly was much, much lesser. There are a few logistical or infrastructure issues which need to be handled, particularly for data sensitive applications. How do you protect data? But technology solutions are available for all of that. So I think this, from a customer point of view, particularly for the IT services industry, is positive because there is more conviction which the customer has on the model. Having said that, I think customers also see such a challenge as an opportunity to ensure that they get cost efficiencies, which their business is always looking at. So there is going to be a short-term growth pressure because every customer whom I spoke to made it categorical that my business is suffering, so I'm going to demand price cuts from my vendors. So there is going to be what I call a compression of revenue in the IT services. So growth may be stretched maybe for a 12-month period. But clearly the confidence of the customers and the bond between the customer and the partner has strengthened in the context of this crisis.
Okay, while we were discussing about IT industry leaders' role, I think you have always advocated, I remember, the need for openness in communication with the workforce, particularly when we go through tough times. And so how do you see IT industry leaders staying close to their workforce, particularly I would say the middle managers in large organizations, for the reason that when middle managers see themselves suffering more here, and they also are probably closer to the larger workforce. So how do you see IT industry leaders really staying closer to the people there?
That's a very important distinction you made, Manoj, between the IT leaders and the middle management. Because I think the IT leaders are doing a phenomenal job communicating with their next level, communicating with teams wherever it's possible. And to that extent, keeping the channels of communication open. In fact, if you for a moment move from the large IT companies to the thousands of startups which are there in Bangalore, I think almost all of them are doing a fabulous job on that. One big difference which I see compared to the earlier crisis is that when startups weren't evolved, they used to almost feel fearful to communicate to their employees because they said, what would I tell them? But in this transition, I think even startups have started communicating, over communicating with their teams and sharing what they think they see the reality as. In fact, I attended one or two because I was sort of talking to them. They said, hey, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. So all of us have to figure this out. But while that's happening, this is how we need to be focused on customers. This is what we need to do. And I think it's working extremely well. So I think in this period of uncertainty, the mantra in terms of over communicating and being proactive in your communication is really sort of helping companies. Where I think work needs to be done, and there is, to be honest, struggle, is really the middle management level. Because the middle managers whom I spoke to were already challenged in even trying to maintain a sense of control as people were distributed. In a sense, they still have that thing saying, hey, I don't know whether I'm fully in control, what will happen after this, and so on. Now, they also are, in a sense, not clear in terms of what will they communicate beyond the work content to their teams. Partly because many of them have that fear saying, hey, what am I going to tell these people? There are a few examples of people who have used this as an opportunity. The one I mentioned who conducts weekly, twice hackathons to solve problems. It's a very interesting example. And I don't think he did it because his boss told him to do that. He just said that, hey, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. Why should I keep telling them about COVID when they're reading enough about that? Nor do I know in terms of what to tell them in a confident way. So let me just engage them. So I think organizations in terms of preparing middle managers for that haven't done a great job, particularly in the IT industry. The other thing which I've been telling a few leaders in the IT industry is that this is a model to stay. When I talk to customers and find that they're going to ask for it, there's a model to stay. So, but it's important you now, once the crisis sort of slows down, to prepare your middle managers on how to manage in the new model. The second key thing is, I'm also sort of telling them that the whole concept of the so-called gig workers, which is probably prevalent more in the food services delivery and so on, or in the Uber, Ola world, is going to become a reality even in the IT industry. I could have somebody who's a user experience analyst who would work for a company for 2 months, finish that work and go and work for another company. So The whole idea of somebody who works based on his expertise, works for a small period of time and then moves out and goes and does probably 2 months of trekking and then comes back, is going to become a reality. So how do companies embed mobile workers as a part of their workforce? How do they manage with them? Has both a management and a team building, emotion alignment issue, which today I don't think IT industry is handling or even thought about it.
Dr. Prabha, the role of a leader in general, and particularly in a very emotionally charged or difficult times, why leaders are important. And but if you look at an industry like IT industry, where far better communication channels exist, perhaps. So, what role do you think they could have to address the emotional health of their workforce?
So I think, I was reading somewhere that in routine emergencies, the leader's experience counts. But in emergencies like this, which are sudden and unexpected, it's the leader's character which counts, So I think ultimately it will be the leader's inner need to support the employees and to be available and to help them through this crisis, which is what will basically be important. I think transparency is extremely important. Like you rightly mentioned about fear and uncertainty when we discussed earlier, if people don't know enough about what's going on in the company or what's going on in an organization, then the fears and anxieties are worse. So developing that channel through some pathway, to make sure and getting everybody involved into some sort of decision making, even if it's a decision about some small decision that they can make. They can't make big decisions for the company, but anything little that they can do for the company, any baby step that they can do, makes them feel that they're part of the whole exercise rather than being talked down to or things being decided by a core group or a task force and being told to you. So I think just that increasing that level of, at least the level of involvement in some way or the other, is something that the leader should do. And I think acknowledge the emotional distress. At the same time, show resolve, So not allow your helplessness to get transmitted to your employee, but at the same time say, hey, I understand how terrible it must be for you right now. I understand that you are going through this emotional issue. I understand that you are anxious. I understand that you're going through stress. But let me tell you that we will try and do as much as possible to support you and help you. So I think the combination of being soft, acknowledging emotions and feelings, yet showing that resolve is I think very important. I think it was Roosevelt who said that the fear of the fear is more important. So I think trying to make sure that you allay that fear a little bit and acknowledge that. I think these are important, and I think three things which leaders should not have, especially in this changing scenario. One is denial. Saying, oh no, it'll be all right, don't worry. I think that's not going to help. Too much of nostalgia is also not a good thing. Trying to say, oh, you know what, in my days it happened like this, and but because this is a new scenario, like KK said. I mean, we haven't faced this before. So just because I faced some other crisis 10 years back doesn't make me equipped to handle this. So don't go into nostalgia. And the third thing is being stubborn, and saying my way is the highway kind of a thing. I think the leader needs to be flexible to get inputs and, ideas from people around you. And sometimes brilliant ideas are coming from people, in junior to you, middle management, really down the rung, because they are collating facts. So I think that's the other thing, that a leader can't do anything by himself or herself. Facts are changing every day. So there need to be good data analytics being fed to the leader to kind of to be able to make those mature decisions. And the leader should also be able to recognize where they don't have the expertise and to get expert teams together, even for short while teams together of different kinds, and sometimes multidisciplinary teams, Working from, one of the things I found very useful, like yesterday I picked up the phone and talked to another hospital doctor, saying, hey, what are you people doing? Like, how are you managing? You're dealing with even worse situation than us. So I think not being scared of saying, let me take help from another organization, or let me take ideas from how another colleague and from another organization is handling things. So I think learning from each other is something we should be very open to, rather than looking inwards. I think looking outside is important.
Finally, looking at the return to normalcy, which is a very even more difficult discussion to have. Yeah, exactly. So when we get our freedom back and when we are back into our offices, what should the leaders be prepared for, Dr. Prabha? It's very, I don't know. I mean, would you believe that we all will be back emotionally in the way we left or started our lockdown period?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot has happened in the middle. We've kind of lost touch with our people anyway. We're not having our usual meetings, and so there's been a gap. It's almost like a kid coming back to school after summer vacation, and not a very pleasant summer vacation. So it's going to be very difficult for them to adjust to new ways of thinking. There's going to be social distancing. Even at workplace, many workplaces may downsize or change the way they work. Teams may change. So I think that it's going to be quite hard. And those people who've gone through crises during this period, they're going to find it difficult. But on a positive note, there is a condition called post-traumatic growth, which was basically found in Japan after the Kobe earthquake. And what they found was that even though people had gone through a lot of trauma, when they came back, to work and back to normalcy, so-called normalcy, that many people had become slightly more creative. They had actually found newer ways of adapting to situations. They were able to work better in certain areas. They had developed some more skills. So there is a concept called post-traumatic growth, which I think if employees are helped through it now, we might even see better ways and more creative ways of working. So I wouldn't, while I'm concerned about some things, I'm also optimistic that we will find new ways of working together. And those are the things we'll need to then encourage as leaders, as organizations, that, yeah, maybe, this is a good way of working. So I think those are the things we'll need to be prepared for. But yet at the same time, I think a lot would have happened, and just catching up, finding ways of some kind of debriefing after. It's not that, you come back and it's work as usual. I think it will take some time for people to adjust, and organizations need to look at the mental health of people and find ways of talking about it openly. So if one thing organizations can do is to be able to talk about emotions, talk about mental health in a much, much more open manner. And for those who feel they need some help, to provide that, to keep like 2 or 3 months as a buffer time, not to expect that people will come back and start working at 100% efficiency. Because, things have been so different. So give that buffer time so that people can come from one place to that other place that they were before, and may not be the same place as before. So changes will need to be considered.
Kika, do you see NASSCOM and your NASSCOM Foundation playing a role in helping industry leaders to pick up employee well-being as an important part of the future strategies? And how can that happen? Particularly mental health?
I'm not sure about mental health, to be honest. We were just before this lockdown engaged in an exercise in terms of saying, how does NASSCOM Foundation become more relevant in the context of what the industry takes? So we'd engaged an external organization to help us out on that. And some of the themes were in terms of how do we get underprivileged girls to get into the tech industry by picking them up young and sort of walking them through. But in the context of this, really it becomes an opportunity, because we were looking at opportunities without knowing about some of this chaos which happened. But having been engaged in this, certainly we see that we need to look at the whole area of well-being and how does one really help organizations plan out the whole ability. Because like Dr. Prabha rightly said, I think these are things which you proactively need to do. And today, thankfully, I think technology can also play a role in that. So till now, NASSCOM Foundation is focused on technology for good, on how do you leverage technology to, in a way, create jobs for physically challenged people and so on. But now, if we can combine the theme of overall well-being of the people and how do you leverage technology to do it, and that's an important requirement for the companies in the technology space, it becomes a very important aspect.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of this session. Thank you so much, Dr. Prabha and KK, for such a wonderful insight and engaged discussion. Indian industry will continue to seek the leadership of the IT sector in many ways. We also hope that the industry will rise to the occasion to innovate solutions that address the challenges of the communities also. Thank you, viewers, for joining us today. It was nice to have you with us. We look forward to having you with us again in our next Moving Minds webinar. If you are keen to stay updated on a wide range of subjects and knowledge on mental health care, please subscribe to our newsletter and visit www.whiteswanfoundation.org to benefit from the knowledge repository that we have put together for you. Thank you so much again, KK and Dr. Prabha. This is Manoj Chandran signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Manoj. Thanks, Dr. Prabha.